Hey guys, welcome back to History Revision Success. So today I've got another GCSE revision video on the topic of migration. So I previously filmed a video about the early part of the migration course and I had quite a lot of requests to continue. So here we go. Today we're going to be looking at the Americas with kind of particular focus on when they were settled, who settled them, what happened, what the consequences were, things like that. So to fill up that America section of the migration course. Now, before we get on to that, I just wanted to explain about a new Instagram that I have kind of created and I'm now going to be adding to. Now, the whole focus of this is to give you little bite-sized nugget chunks of information that you can use that can be helpful to you in your studies, in your GCSEs or your A-levels. So every single day of the week, there is a different theme, and those themes are always going to run the same every single week. So for example, every Monday, I'm going to be posting a question, a GCSE or an A-level question, and I'm going to show you how I would answer it. What would my argument be? How would I approach it? What are the different factors you need to include? So at History Revision Success, exactly the same as this channel, and it will all be there for you. So hopefully you can go and follow me. That'll be helpful for you. And it will give you those little chunks. So in addition, we've got revision tips. I've got grade 9 and A-star at A-level tips. So it might be content, or it might be little ideas about how to make sure you get those grades. So really important kind of insider tricks and things like that. And then every Friday, I'm going to be revealing a little sneak peek at an essay plan or at some notes, something which will help you, maybe a whole structured conclusion to something that will be really helpful to you. So hopefully that's going to be helpful, and please go and follow me and then you can keep up to date on that. So the Tudors in America. We're starting with the Tudors and the Stuarts, and in particular, this was an age of momentous change. Now, the Tudors were very successful in uniting England and Wales. They also managed to unite large parts of Ireland with the main body of England at this time, even though the Irish didn't particularly want to be colonised, as you can expect. After that, the Stuarts were very successful in uniting Scotland, because obviously we had James, who was the king of both Scotland and England. So at this point, Britain, as such, has taken formation. Now, Britain is becoming more prosperous. Farming and industry has expanded. So because of this, we see a surge of greater overseas trade. And that means that people look towards the New World. Now, this is also benefited by some major improvements that took place in terms of kind of technology and things like that to help this overseas travel be more effective. In the 1400s, it becomes possible for longer journeys to take place. Navigation technology has meant that it's now possible. And this leads to, in 1492, Christopher Columbus sailing across the Atlantic to find new routes to China. Now, instead of finding China, he finds the lands that he calls the West Indies, the continents that we now know as America. And therefore, that shows that Spain was the first country, really, the first major nation to colonize the Americas. Spain and Portugal do significant colonization. Now, because of this, the Spanish get incredibly rich, ahead of other countries in Europe, notably England. And so there's a desire to kind of join in. So from 1496, King Henry VII joined the exploration. He gives a man called John Cabot the mission of finding new lands. Now, Cabot leaves Bristol, sails across the Atlantic, lands on the north coast of America, which is present-day Canada. He, unfortunately for him, does not find any riches or financial gains. There was no silk or gold there, so he returns. However, this does mark the first point of kind of the idea of the British Empire, British settlers moving to new lands and eventually settling along the coast, east coast of America, the place we know today as the 13 colonies. So we also have under Elizabeth I, the development of two new types of technology which will help sea travel. We have the lateen, which is a triangular sail, which helps you move more efficiently. And we also have the astrolabe, which was a bit like a compass, helping with navigation. So it's very, very useful, very helpful for sea travel. Now, as I said, the English community begin to settle along the 13 colonies on the east coast. This is the region that the English settle in, and it's very important that you name it the 13 colonies because it shows your terminology and specific subject knowledge. Now, during this time, there were a number of people who were very important to this English sea travel. The first being John Hawkins. Now, Hawkins was a respected naval commander, merchant, privateer, and pirate. Remember the difference between a pirate and a privateer. A pirate is somebody who is not sanctioned by the monarch. A privateer is someone who essentially does exactly the same thing, but they have been given permission by the monarch to do so. So Elizabeth actually very much allowed these men to privateer, attack, steal gold from Spanish ships, and bring that money back to England, as long as they then shared the profits with her. And this is one of the things that causes a huge breakdown in the Anglo-Spanish relationship over time, because Elizabeth is essentially sanctioning piracy of Spanish boats. Anyway, John Hawkins was involved in the privateering, and he's also responsible for building up the Elizabethan Royal Navy. Now, we also recognize kind of the darker side of his past, and he has been known as the father of the slave trade. He was the first Englishman to deal in slaves after permission from Elizabeth I. So he did a lot in his lifetime. He was quite significant for changing English trade abroad, particularly through his links with the slave trade. Now, in addition, we have Walter Raleigh. So Walter Raleigh was encouraged by Francis Drake, who I'll get to in a moment, and he was persuaded by Elizabeth to go and explore the lands in North America. Now, America had already been colonized by Spain from 1565, mainland Florida. So Raleigh wanted to find an area that was yet unconquered. And the first colony he established was Roanoke in 1584. Now, if you know anything about Roanoke, you'll know there is a big, big, big mystery, controversy surrounding what happened there, because essentially the colonists were living in Roanoke that experienced lots and lots of problems. One of those problems being they'd arrived too late to plant the seeds they had carried with them. So therefore they had to rely very heavily on native communities to provide them with food. Essentially the leader of the colony has to leave and go home to try and get more supplies. On his way back, he's blocked by the Armada, Spanish Armada, so he has to wait a couple of extra years until that's finished. And when he returns to Roanoke, there is nothing left. There are some kind of mysterious carvings in the tree, and all of this leads you to question what happened. So that's kind of an unexplained mystery. We never know. We don't know what happened to the colonists at Roanoke. It could have been kind of local hostile tribes. It could have been they died from natural causes, from starvation. But anyway, we don't know. So that's Walter Raleigh. Now, Francis Drake was another important character, and he was the first person to circumnavigate the globe. So that means to sail all the way around the world. He wanted to do this to find new sources of trade. He also wanted to challenge Spanish dominance. So trade and exploration were therefore very integral to English foreign policy at kind of setting the stage to this entrance of Britain as a global superpower who was involved in these kind of international affairs. So all of this led to the fact that we have set up these 13 colonies in the New World. By the 1600s, English people had then started to cultivate plantations on these areas of land. Now, plantations in this sense were set up namely for sugar and cotton. And as you kind of can expect from the climate needed to grow these items, it was mainly in those orange colonies in the south that these plantations flourished. So we've got sugar and cotton. Now, you might be wondering why people went, you know, a very treacherous journey. You get there to an unknown land with with no real indication of what might happen to you. So there were kind of two main categories of person who traveled. We had people traveling for religious reasons. Many Puritans and Catholics felt they had not been permitted to worship as they wished in Britain, and they wanted to go somewhere they could have greater religious freedom. We also have economic reasons. So from 1607, the first British colony, Jamestown, had been established, and homes were built there with cash crops planted like cotton, tobacco, sugar, and potatoes. These crops could be exported to Britain for great profit. There were many second sons of gentrymen and nobility who didn't stand to inherit anything if they stayed at home. So therefore they wanted and were pushed to go abroad to try and find their fortune. And there was this saying, you know, you could live like a king if you went and set up a plantation in America. So another place that people settled was the Caribbean. Now, this was less about colonies and more focused on plantations. So the first British businessmen set up plantations in the West Indies, in islands such as Barbados and the Cayman Islands. Now, Barbados was acquired by the British in 1625, and it became an island for tobacco plantations. Barbados was also the largest slave colony that existed for the British. It was a plantation which would soon switch to growing sugar, and by the 1690s, we had successfully covered the whole of Barbados in sugar plantations. So it became far more profitable than mainland America. This was a place purely developed for profit, not a place for settlement. Now, in addition to that, we had the idea of global trading. So trade in the Americas was not supposed to just allow for the development of these plantations. The idea was then that you could use the profits to grow and develop colonies elsewhere around the world. It was a place to make money, to then spend the money developing the empire elsewhere. Places like India, for example. So what they would do is they would import cotton, wheat, rice, coffee, these kind of raw materials grown in America. They would bring them back to Britain. They would then go to British factories who would then create the fabrics. And then that fabric would be returned to the British colonies and sold to the colonists for a higher price for a profit. Now, we can look at some of the people who benefited from this. Many people in Britain significantly benefited from the idea of plantations, slavery, and America. So ship owners, for example, would take up to 50% of the profits. Ports, so people working at the ports, Liverpool, for example, processed 50% of the slave ships, and London processed 75% of the sugar ships. Factory owners, 50% of the textiles were created in Manchester. Ambrose Crawley was an iron merchant. He managed to profit hugely from making iron chains to be used on the slave ships. Bankers could give merchants loans, then charge high interest prices to get that money back. And ordinary people got jobs in factories. 4,000 people in Birmingham, for example, were employed to make guns, which were then traded in Africa for slaves. So the impact of the slave trade, the impact on of kind of the plantations in America were hugely significant in Britain. And it was not just, you know, the people sailing on the boat who got involved in this process. Now, moving on a little bit, we've obviously mentioned before the impact of India and the influence of the money from America on developing India as a nation. And what we start to see from 1720 is this idea that as the kind of worldwide empire grew, North America and India becoming increasingly profitable, monarchs stopped granting permission for privateering. There was less need to steal from other nations. They didn't need to do it anymore. So therefore, the Royal Navy took out some anti-piracy measures. By 1720, piracy was rare in America, and pirates were chased out of harbors that they had once been safe in, for example, Nassau in the Bahamas. Now, that is where I'm going to come to the end of this video. I am going to do a second video on the kind of the colonies themselves and going into what happens with the War of Independence and how that ends in America. So hopefully this has been helpful as part 1 of this kind of mini series on America. It's given you some information about what was established in America, why people went, how profitable they were and change over time. And, you know, some ideas as well of the significance of kind of Tudor settlement. You can talk about many of these longer lasting impacts, the creation of plantations, the impact on British people. Please like and subscribe to the video. It really helps my channel and it means I can keep making videos like this, which I know are helpful to you. So I'd be very grateful if you can support me that way.